think that like in the musicals I've written, like nothing has ever worked out on the first try. Like it's always like many, like just the rewriting process is even more intense than it is for plays, I think, because it's so hard to actually nail it,
Yeah.
because it requires such specificity.
Yeah.
And I think also, I'm sure we'll get to this, but like my process with, at least with my most recent, with an Xmas story, was to write a to like overwrite scenes, to basically write a version of the scene that sucks, but that just has a lot of material for the lyricist and composer to pull from.
Uh-huh.
And then I'm like starting from, and then they've written a song, and then I sort of have to like work backwards and write the scene around it, even though I already wrote the
Interesting.
scene. And like because of that, it feels like I'm always like, it takes a long time to like get back to the original like story or impulse or whatever.
One of the biggest topics in musical theater writing that seems to cause confusion for both writers and non-writers alike is book writing. What is the book, and how do we write a good one? Today's conversation with Charlie O'Leary sheds a little bit of light on the subject. Enjoy!
Welcome everybody back to the new interview series, Writer Real Talk, on the YouTube channel, where I interview writers and other originating artists about their experiences in creating musical theater. Each interview has a topic or a theme that we are likely to discuss along the way, but we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, so who knows? We'll see how this goes. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest for today, Mr. Charlie O'Leary. Charlie and I met almost a decade ago.
Oh boy.
Uh-huh, put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Mm.
And that feels weird. But we met in the BMI musical theater writing workshop. Charlie was in the class, I was auditing the class, and Charlie kept saying really smart things. And so I wanted to sit nearer to Charlie. And so we got to know each other and got to become really good friends. And we're still really good friends, and we constantly do silly things and play board games and all sorts of nonsense. But Charlie, would you for the audience today be able to tell us a little bit about who you are, how you identify as an artist, what you do, life career wise, maybe what work of yours people may have seen or come across, that sort of thing.
Sure, yeah. I will give a just general life story overview, work, everything.
Wow.
My name's Charlie O'Leary. I use he, him pronouns. I grew up in northwestern Pennsylvania in the middle of nowhere, and then went to Notre Dame where I got my BA in theater. I moved to New York for the BMI Musical Theater Workshop, where I met Michael, as they just said, and I then proceeded to like pursue a career in playwriting and musical theater writing for the next 6 years in New York. I Some of the work that I produced in my time there, I wrote a show called Two Star Motel with our mutual friend Patrick Spencer, that had a small production in 2017 with the Dare Tactic. I self-produced my musical that I co-wrote with Carl Hinsey, also friend of the pod, in 2018, and that show was called The Exposed Bone Workshop Collective Ensemble Studio, Not Just Your Average Theater Company. Theater Company presents When Pigs Fly, a reading series of hot and spicy new American plays written by the artistic director, and that was at the Pit.
I can't believe you just did that one breath. Good for you.
Thank you. I've had too much practice saying that stupid title. In the posters, actually, it's right here in the mirror. If you can
Yes.
see it way in the back there. So in 2019, I left New York to move to Iowa City to pursue my MFA in playwriting at the Iowa Playwrights Workshop, which I just finished. My thesis play here was called Basically Children, and it is about age gap relationships and amateur pedophile hunters. And Gen Z queer politics. So that's sort of what I've been up to. And then I guess the other thing, or the other show I should mention, because I'm realizing also everything that I've mentioned aside from my thesis play was a musical. I'm currently working on a show. I'm writing a book for a musical called An Xmas Story that is coming to the Players Theater in December, which Michael very generously read a draft of last night in a little friends and family table read we had.
It's
And
so
that
good, people. You're gonna want to go.
Thank you. Yeah, it's that came to me via Patrick Spencer, previously mentioned, and our other friend Anthony DeAngelis. They had a concept for an 80s era slasher film inspired musical comedy set on a Christmas tree farm and told from the perspective of the trees, and I could not resist that. So
It's so good.
it's been really fun. It's I don't think of myself as somebody who writes a lot of comedy, but like I'm realizing most of the things that I've named are like straight up comedies.
Yeah.
So yeah, jokes are fun.
Jokes are fun and you're good at them too. So like
Thank you.
let's put that out there that like I think of you as a comedic writer. So
Thank you.
even if you don't think of yourself as such, the Xmas story or an Xmas story, right? An Xmas story is a delight, and people are going to want to go. It's the Players Theater in December, right?
Yes, December of this year. It's going to be the first 3 weekends, like Thursday through Sunday, and tickets are on sale now, if you can believe it. Which
I've actually already bought mine, so
I know. Oh, I so appreciate. I saw that in the like Ovation text thing or whatever it was, and I was like, oh, Michael.
Of course, as soon as they went on sale, like, yep, yes, please.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, let's do a little like getting to know you as an artist sort of conversation, some questions before we dive into today's topic, which is book writing. We're going to talk about book writing today because book writing is something that is hard and you have experience doing so, so we should chat. But first, my first question for you is what musical theater writers work or style do you gravitate toward the most?
Yeah. I feel like for me, because I transitioned from like I came into theater through musical theater. Musical theater was sort of my first love. And a lot of the really formative shows for me were like shows that I listened to because I was again in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't seeing a lot of musical theater, but I was listening to a lot of like cast albums. And for me in like high school and college, like William Finn was really huge. Falsettos is like probably my favorite musical, and just like meant an enormous amount to me at the time as I was like coming out and like sort of feeling myself reflected in work for maybe the first time. I think was that show. I am a big fan of Adam Guan. I think that he is just a delight. And his shows are so much fun. And yes, he seems like a real sweetheart too, which is like wonderful. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like Janine Tesori is like I think like the reigning champion of musical theater writing at the moment. And
say more about that.
I mean, I just think that it is hard for me to think of another musical theater composer who has written such a wide range of shows. Like every show feels like it has such a like different style, different approach, like musically. And it always fits the story being told. And I don't know. I just think that like her work is really consistently brilliant. And I love that she like collaborates with multiple lyricists. I think that's really fun.
Yeah.
There's that model of like the, Rodgers and Hammerstein and like Ahrens and Flaherty, which is great. And like longstanding collaborations are wonderful. But I also think that, yeah, like being able to like transform yourself to work with new people is really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then of course, like, I mean, more recently, I'm thinking like Michael R. Jackson. A Strange Loop is like a show that unfortunately I left New York right as it was opening off Broadway. I did not see it there and have not been back in time to see the Broadway production. But like that soundtrack is like just incredible to me.
Yeah.
I think that like, and there's early songs of his too that I remember being obsessed with in college. He has a song called Secretly Hoping that is the hook is it's sung by a woman and she says, "I'm secretly hoping that you will be my boyfriend, even though I know you have one of your own." And it's like a laugh line that becomes like something really sort of dark and tragic by the end. And it's just the way he turns it from a joke into like something really like moving and heartfelt is like, has always stuck with me.
That's really interesting because I think that on a microcosmic scale is kind of what A Strange Loop does, just in the show as a whole, like in those spoilers for Strange Loop, just in those opening moments where the thoughts, that's what they're called, right? The thoughts are just swirling around the job of being an usher. And then by the end, what the thoughts truly mean to him and his identity and how he experiences the world, like that kind of progression throughout the show is really fascinating to watch.
I really would like to see that production very badly.
It's good.
Yeah,
It's good.
I'm thinking like the last time I saw a musical on Broadway that really, I mean, there have been musicals that I've seen that I've really loved, but I guess also the reason Janine's Story came to mind is like Fun Home is a really important musical to me, and I think is doing something really, it was doing something really exciting.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, continues to.
Still is, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I hope that show is produced for many, many years to come. Yeah, and then of course, like the obvious, like people like, obviously Sondheim is like super important to me, and like I think is like, one of the like greatest American poets. And like, yeah, I'm trying to think of like who else, but like
That's a great list.
I don't know. I love musical theater. And then also just like my friends, like I feel like so many people like whose work I love are just like my peers and like people I like met in BMI, and like yeah, there are songs from BMI workshop that I still like sing in my head that we like sing to each other sometimes. So
that's
yeah.
Yeah, that's a lovely answer. I really like that you have such a broad range that you gravitate toward, and you clearly have such a deep love for musical theater. And I knew you as a musical theater writer first, so when I began to interact with you more as someone who writes plays, writes good plays, and writes them very quickly, I was like, whoa, Charlie can do all this. That's insane. And I still think you are, I've said this to you before, but I'm going to go ahead and say it here on the pod, which is, I think you are the most prolific playwright that I know.
Oh,
and
wow.
I think, I don't mean that just in terms of like how many things you can write, but how many things of quality you do write.
Thank you.
So I just want to go ahead and throw that out.
No,
A little
I
context.
really appreciate that. I sometimes feel like I don't write. I feel like every writer feels like they don't write nearly enough. Like every writer is like, I don't write every day. I'm therefore a failure. But like, it's important to keep in mind. I think it's important to keep in mind. One of the big lessons of grad school for me was typing is the last part of writing.
Say it again.
Yes. It
That's
like
good.
I say it to myself in the mirror like all the time. I'm like, you have to live to write, and like it's okay that I write in sprints. Like I will write in like a 2-week sprint and like finish a play, very quickly. But like it's because I thought about it for like a year beforehand. So
yeah. Two reactive things I want to say there. Number one is that whole idea of all the stuff that happens in your head first before it hits paper ever. I mean, I think that's really where the majority of writing happens. I know people like to say that writing's really in the rewriting, and I think that's true as well, but in a different way, right? I think the initial creative sparks moment of writing really happens over a period of time as thoughts like percolate and move around, and you sleep and you shower and you take walks and things just happen and the ideas come to you. So I really love that typing is the last step of that. Then the other thing I want to say is I was doing a submission yesterday that involved King's Legacy, and I not give a development history, but they wanted me to write out like development, like write in paragraph 4 what the development has been of this, and then how you would like to use this opportunity to further develop. And as I was going through, I was like, I guess I've only written less than half a dozen shows, but writing King's Legacy, there's been so much writing over the past decade that like I guess I discount, but there's probably like 40 songs on the cutting room floor. Like I have been writing.
Oh my god,
you
that's
know?
amazing.
Like,
yeah, that's how I felt with my thesis play. I had never rewritten a play so much before. It's like I think I probably have like 40 or 50 drafts on my computer from the past year, and just like the first draft is unrecognizable compared to the present draft. They are 100% different plays. I wrote 2 very different plays that have the same title, and one of them I've thrown in the trash. And like that is rewriting very much is I feel like rewriting that play was very much like spark. Like that is still the same kind of energy, and like is very much still the writing. 40 songs. I hope that you do a concert just of the cut songs someday.
I will have to pull out some old hard drives to find some of the original ones. Oh god. But I will say, hey, 4 songs made it from the first draft and are still in the show. I mean, all of them are altered, but they're still there. So
I feel like there's usually in everything I write, usually there's like at least one scene that kind of makes it from beginning to end, like roughly unscathed.
yeah.
I did do that thing of like comparing documents to like see with my thesis production. I was like, I wonder if, and like the final scene has big like paragraphs that are still roughly the same. Other than that, it's like, but yeah, no, I wrote a play about Super Smash Brothers in 4chan earlier this year, in a very quick sprint, in like a 4-day sprint, after doing 6 months of research. And most of the play needs to be heavily rewritten, but there's one scene in particular that like I think just like I wrote it at like 5 a.m. I was like delirious, and I think the scene is kind of done, which is wild, and you never know when that's going to happen.
Oh, no way. Oh, I love that though. I love talking about the process of writing, which is not what we're doing today. But the two of us could talk about that forever. So. All right, my next question for you is, what have you seen as, and like, granted, your journey has been, I think, a little bit different from a lot of people's in that you graduated, you spent years doing career, and then went back to school for playwriting. But what have you seen as like your biggest challenge thus far in your career?
I mean, I guess I feel like my biggest career challenge was just honestly accepting that I was a playwright, and like that's like what I was going to be doing with my life. Yeah, I think that like it took me like probably like a good 5 years out of college before I was like, oh no, this is what I'm doing. I care about this enough that I can spend my life doing this. And it wasn't until that point, I don't think, that like I took myself seriously enough to be taken seriously by anyone else. Because my first instinct was like, oh, like, finding an agent, or like, getting a production, or getting a reading, or like meeting collaborators, or whatever. But all of that is like sort of underneath the banner of like taking your own self seriously, taking your writing seriously, and like and trusting that like you have something worth saying, which I think like takes time, but also like I think everyone has something worth saying. I truly believe everyone like has a million stories in them. So yeah, and artistically, I feel like I've had many challenges, and many like there's been like many learning processes, like of just like learning how to like write something, and I feel like the hardest thing there was learning how to like trim down and like cut to the bare bones. I reread some of my like old work, especially old drafts of my old work, and they are just, every scene is so bloated. Everything is like twice as long as it needs to be. Really good for book writing, a musical. Not what you want for a final draft of a play. Early stages book writing. But yeah, so I think that like learning how to let go of like things that I was precious about, and like learning that like it is important that every line reveal something new. That was like a hard lesson as well, I think.
Yeah. Ooh, such a good answer, Charlie. I feel like that identity crisis of being able to like call yourself a writer is something that we all struggle with and probably don't talk about enough. But yeah, I think once you hit the moment where you feel comfortable calling yourself a writer, things begin to click more, because you're not fighting yourself anymore. Like the resistance begins to disappear a little bit, which I think is important. Hard to do for people, but I think it's important. And then to your other point that you were just saying about like being concise, the best like exercise for that for me was learning to write lyrics in the classical way, like BMI style, using AABA, ABAB, like all those very condensed forms taught me how precious words are. And in a way that like I was able to then take and move into my scene writing. Treat this like a lyric. This needs to be the only as long as it needs to be, and as short as possible.
Yeah. And sometimes like as it needs to be long, like that's okay too. But like as short as possible is always, I think, like it's respectful of your audience's time and energy and attention. And it also is just like the way to make sure that you're really clear about what you're trying to say. Because like if there's a lot of other things going on, sometimes like it becomes muddied, like what you're actually trying to get at and what the story is you're actually telling.
Yeah. And I think two concepts that have helped me a lot in those regards, which are kind of opposite concepts, is one of that, like, write it all out and then take away the stuff that you don't need later on. That whole like finding the statue within the piece of marble idea. I think that's a great idea. And then the other thing that I think is a great exercise for anyone who writes for musical theater, like words person, it's a pain in the butt for a lot of people I know. I actually really like this, but having to write a lyric to a piece of music that is preset, where you don't get the flexibility to change it. Like you have to work within this structure. You only have so many notes to work with. Go.
It's actually my favorite way to write lyrics. It's such a fun puzzle. I love the puzzle of it.
Yeah. I know a lot of people hate it though.
No, of course. And like, obviously, like, writing lyric first, totally valid. Like, there's no wrong way to make a musical theater song. But I love like when a composer hands me a melody, and like, especially when it's a strict melody, when there's not room for like little pickup, syllables or whatever. Yeah, such a fun challenge. And I really love the insight that like, of course that like is a useful, like you carry such useful lessons from that into writing scenes as well. For me, rhythm and like the musicality of a scene and just like the way that a scene like flows in time is really, really important. And I'm realizing that definitely probably comes from my like musical theater background. Music, it's everywhere.
It is. Cool. I'd like to reverse now and ask you, what have you felt has been like your greatest success so far, or it could be the thing you're most proud of, either.
Yeah. I am really proud of, this is maybe, I don't know if like I want to be held to this answer for the rest of my life. But I think like
it's gonna be on recording.
Oh
forever.
Shit. Oh no, you're recording this? The summer before I left for Iowa, in July, I did 4 shows. I did like a different show every week. The first was a reading of my play, Ridgeway, which is like still one of my favorite things I've written. It's just a play I'm really proud of and has yeah, it's just a play I'm really proud of. And we had a really great cast and just a really great team. And that was a really fun process. And then like 5 days later, I performed a solo show, which was my first time doing a full-length solo show, which was wild. Which directed by Ivy Lowe, who will be directing an Axmas story in December at the Players Theater. And she just like working with her in that capacity was so much fun and so wild. And then the following week, I did a short play, or like an hour-long play called The Goodbye Party, which was sort of a musical as well. Our friend David Carl wrote some of the music. It was just really goofy and silly. I performed in that one as well. We did it in my friend Charles's backyard, Charles Quittner, who directed it. And then the following week, I had a reading of my play Humiliation Play, which is an older play of mine. I had written the first draft in 2015, done some readings in 2015 and 16, and then put it in a drawer for a few years. I pulled it back out because somebody had found it on New Play Exchange of all places. Sign up for New Play Exchange if you haven't already. I have actually gotten opportunities. It's really wild, but people really do like search New Play Exchange. So I had this reading of Humiliation Play, and the draft was like 120 pages, and I looked at it and I just started cutting everything that felt like superfluous, and I cut 20 pages in that process. And I don't miss a single word that I cut. Like not a word. It's amazing just a little space how much like that was valuable in that process. So I feel like this like month of like just doing shows I was really proud of back to back to back to back, and like getting just the joy of like sharing my work with like people I cared about and that like I was writing for, was, I don't know. I'm like, we don't get to live like that all the time. No one gets to live like that all the time, but like, what a joy and like, what a pleasure. And like, for me, what a success to like present 4 things in a month that 4 different things that I was really happy with and proud of, and that were all really different.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. I am both like tired by the thought of it and also so invigorated by the idea of being able to present 4 things I've written in a space like that. That's wow. See what I
It was
mean about how varied your projects are? You write everything and you're so good.
Thank you. I do have to like admit or like say, at that point, that month in July, it was my very last month in New York. I had already quit my day job. I like was full-time just doing theater for the month because I had the savings, fortunately, to do that because I got severance. Yeah. So like not something that again, like I see myself being able to even do again, but like so much fun.
I know. I think when the residual checks start really coming in, you'll be able to
Yeah.
afford to do that.
That's like get that licensing, baby.
Do
I
it, yeah.
I have one 10-minute musical that's published and available for licensing. And I every 6 months they send me a check for like $200, and I'm like, this is $200 I did not need to do anything for. They just sent it to me. Amazing passive income. We love it. It is the one financially easy thing or good thing about being in theater is like eventually hopefully getting to the point where like somebody else is handling the marketing of your show.
Yes.
Yes. Anyway.
Yeah, like anyone out there who has a piece that is frozen and ready to be published, don't sit on it. Do it. Publishing, licensing, trust me. People look for shows all the time. You may think your show is even too niche. It's not. Someone wants it. You will get a residual check. And that's phenomenal.
Yeah. 100%.
Well, I feel like you may have answered this question already, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Of your full-length pieces that you've written, which one's your favorite, or that you're most like proud of having written?
Ooh, I feel like it changes all the time, and it's also like it's such a like classic question of like like pick your favorite child,
Yeah.
but I for me I think like I will always have there will always be like a place in my heart for humiliation play because it was the first play I wrote that felt like it was really my voice, really my interests, really like doing the things dramatically that I wanted to do. It was my 4th play, and like the 3 before that are like plays that I think like I'm happy with. They served me in their time, but like that was the play where I was like, oh, I can write about the shit that like terrifies me. And like that is worth writing about, and in fact is like really that's where the good stuff is. And so yeah, I think like I've written better plays since then. I think like the rest of the plays, and that play is part of a trilogy called Shame Cycle. The other 2 plays are The Exposure Game and Findom, which they all deal with different aspects of fetish and kink play among gay men on the internet in the early decades of the millennium. So I'm just like really proud of that cycle in general. But yeah, that play is even though it's not my best play, I think it might be my favorite.
Nice. Yeah. And if people want to check that out after hearing about it a little bit, you said it's on the NPX?
It is on NPX. You can download the script on New Play Exchange, along with a lot of my other plays are up there. And the other thing that folks can do if they want to check out Humiliation Play is there was actually a podcast recording thing of it with a company called Dreamwell Theater here in Iowa City. It's through a series called The House is Open. So if you just Google like Dreamwell Theater Humiliation Play or The House is Open Humiliation Play or any of those things with my name or whatever, you should be able to find this. It's also on my website. If you like go to plays and click on Humiliation Play, and like there's a little link to like, and you can listen to it. It's like 80 minutes.
Nice.
And then you don't have to read because who wants to do that?
So if you're averse to reading, there's still a way to experience the play. I love that. To take it back to musical theater for a second,
yes.
Do you have a favorite song that you've written?
Oh my gosh. I mean, like so many, again, for like different reasons. I think like I've written, this is again, like I've written better songs than this since then. And like so I'm a lyricist in like when I do musical theater writing, I either write book or lyrics. And primarily book, I think more recently. But I have written songs with composers that like are so musically brilliant, and I never would have been able to like do that on my own. But my very, very first show was my senior thesis at Notre Dame. It was a musical called Other Apocalypses that I wrote book, music, and lyrics for, because everybody's got to write book, music, and lyrics for at least one show. I think it's very valuable. I'm glad that I got it out of the way early, but like very valuable. What I learned is I'm not a composer, but there's a song in that play called Song for Sane that I wrote about my current boyfriend. This is over a decade ago now, I wrote this song, but like it's just like a love song, and it's like just a little 2-minute ballad, and it's probably a little saccharine, but like I don't care. It's like the song that I feel like that I was most proud of for a very long time, and also that like just really pulled something out of me like emotionally. Like it just sort of like, it comes from a very like, when I listen to that song, I remember what it felt like to be like longing for my partner, and now I'm like with him, and like there's just such a like, things work out, everything is good and like beautiful, and like yeah,
Oh, that's sweet.
but I also wrote a song called Howl Round for for the Exposed Bone workshop with Carl Hinsey that I'm also very proud of, because I got to say the word Howl Round multiple times. If folks don't know, Howl Round is like the theater commons based out of Massachusetts that like publishes a lot of like semi-academic articles about theater. It's a delight and also funny, so check it out.
Howl Round is a great resource. Yeah, definitely check it out. And it's based off the concept of sound feedback, right?
Yes, that's what a howl round is, which I did not know for many years until I like Googled it one day, and I was like, oh, that's kind of like interesting. Like that's actually a really, I don't know if it's an incredibly apt name or like a sort of like, are they like secretly shading themselves a little bit
I don't
by
know.
being like it's a feedback loop, but like I don't know, I love it. I do, soft spot in my heart for this old song I wrote about my boyfriend David, and also for Howl Round.
You see, I'm glad I asked that question. I would not have known those answers, so that's lovely. Oh, all right, one more intro question, then we'll move on to our topic. Is there a specific show? It could also be a musical, movie, or a play adapting to a film, but something involving stage that made a particular impression on you when you were a kid, when you were small.
I mean, the first musical I can remember seeing was like, or a professional musical at least, was a production of Annie in like Pittsburgh, that just like, and I remembered really enjoying it, but like I don't think it really I don't think it like, it wasn't like a moment, some people have, I think, the moment where they're like, I have to do this. And I did not have that moment with Annie. I feel like the first musical or stage thing that I saw that really like sort of like blew my mind and made me feel like I wanted to do the thing might have not been to like Putnam County Spelling Bee, which I probably didn't see until I was like 15 or 16.
Okay.
But yeah, that show like also just means a lot to me. And like is just like it, the like structural element, the like meta theatrical element, like these are like things that I'm still obsessed with today. And I think like a lot of my obsession started there. But yeah, I think that I come from like a music family. Like my grandpa owned a piano store, and his kids took it over. Like I played piano all through elementary school and high school, and like I didn't. And then I was also just really obsessed with stories in general. Like I was a really big reader, and like I was really into alternate reality games, which were like multi-platform sort of thing. Like a character will email you, and then you call them on the phone, and then there's like a chat or whatever, and then you watch a YouTube video. I was really into that. But like, I feel like those are all my inspirations, like more than any one piece of like musical theater that emerged. But then like, again, I started falling in love with musicals in high school. I like, yeah, I wasn't able to like let them go. Obviously, I'm still here.
Yeah.
And I also have to shout out, when I was 19 years old, I took a playwriting class with Anne Garcia Romero, who like the reading list she put together for that class and just the environment she created. That was also like a big like, oh, I want to do theater. I didn't know that I wanted to be a playwright, but I knew that I wanted to do theater, and that there were really cool plays happening that I had no idea. I thought theater was just like Shakespeare. And like, it's like, no, it's Shakespeare, but it's also like Julia Cho. So
oh, that's cool. That's cool. I love the mixed answer from like, this is what my family was, my background, and then like that teenager moment of really having a show like hit you in that way if I want to do this. But then also, yeah, educational environments can just like open everything up and make you aware of things you had no idea existed, which will immediately be of interest or not.
yeah,
Sometimes that can be very overwhelming to learn this whole new world. It's like, how's that? What?
definitely.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Mm.
You're such an interesting guy. I like you so much.
You.
All right.
Right back at you.
Oh, thanks. Stop it. So to start off today's topic, which is book writing, I am very curious. If you were to, we're going off script now. There are no pre-planned questions.
Cool.
If you were to describe the job that is book writing, how would you do it?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of different answers, all of which feel incomplete. And I'm going to just start saying them, and maybe we can figure this out together. I would love to figure out what a book writer does at some point.
Me too.
So I think like the most obvious job of the book writer, or the sort of like surface level thing that actually an audience sort of most clearly sees, is that they handle all of the non-musicalized text.
Yeah.
Or are responsible for most of the non-musicalized text. So any dialogue basically, and as well as things like stage directions, are usually fall under the purview of the book writer. Structure is also like the structure of a piece, and sort of like the way that things all fit together, is often the responsibility of the book writer as well. In my experience, that's not as much the case. It's more collaborative than that. That like the composer, lyricist, and book writer are all sort of working together to find the structure of the piece, to find the story. But there is a model, I think, of writing book where you just sort of write a non-musical play that has a lot of room in it, and then hand it over and are like, find the songs. Good luck. Which is, again, I don't think a model that I've ever really engaged with, but it is interesting to me. And I do think that like structure is still something that like I think the book writer has to have on mind in a way that like the composer and the lyricist don't really have the time or energy to, because they're focused on the small structure of each song. And like somebody to focus on the big structure of the piece is like, I think, important. And then I think the book writer for me also like tends to think about the logistics of like staging, probably, and the ways that that moments are set up in the show. Again, I feel like a lot of that's really collaborative. But I also think that like at the end of the day, if I create a doubling schema in a play that like doesn't work, that's like on me and my responsibility as the book writer, and probably not something the composer and lyricist actually like should have to worry about figuring out, because like writing songs is so deeply time consuming and so deeply challenging, and also it just requires a totally different mindset that like I think having someone to focus on these like other sort of like big picture, like what is the show shaped like things are it's like valuable, I think. But I think, I mean, ultimately, like, I don't know, they write the dialogue.
So I mean, I get the question a lot of what is the book of a show, right? Because this is something that we have a Tony Award for,
Mm-hmm.
is the book of a show. And I have definitely seen some people like raise eyebrows at who wins because they don't understand what book is. But do any of us understand what book is? I mean, the definition that I think I've most gone with throughout my writing career is that it is the story as a whole is the book,
Yeah.
and that the libretto itself is all words, which includes scene work, aka script, and lyric work, aka songs, right? But the book is this general overall, here is the story, here's what the story is.
Yeah.
So I think that idea that you were just saying of like having that outside view looking in on the overall context of everything and how things work structurally is a large part of that job, which I think also kind of crosses over into what directors do, especially collaborative directors, and also into what dramaturgs do. Like all of these jobs that sometimes like composer and lyricist are the simplest jobs to define in all of musical theater writing.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's very true. At least like they are clearly definable in a way that like really, and I guess like, yeah, design positions, maybe like a lighting designer or a costume designer, but even those can get fuzzy in a way that like, if you're writing the music to a show, you're writing the music to a show.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just had a conversation with my roommate, Stephanie Fisher, costume designer. And we were chatting about how costume designers are kind of also some of your best dramaturgs.
Yeah.
Because they need to know that research. And they need to have an outside perspective and need to know like contextually how this scene interacts with the next time we see that character. Like that is something that they have to be aware of, just like the book writer does.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I love when designers like go deep on dramaturgy. It's like the best. I'm like, oh, that's what that looks like, that thing that I've been writing about for a year. Amazing.
Yeah, I think one of the weirdest and most delightful experiences I've ever had as a book writer was the world premiere of King's Legacy, where I was in the room for production meetings because I was the writer of the show. But like I had not that good truth. I answered questions occasionally, but like listening to especially designers and the director all have discussions about the thing and how the different elements interact with each other based on what I had written was the coolest and weirdest out of body experience. Like sometimes I was like, did I write that? Is this it's talking about my words? I don't remember doing that.
It's that funny moment of like, because when you write something, you're the expert on the work, and then you hand it over to other people, and then they become the experts on like specific parts of the work, and like you are no longer the expert anymore. And like, I don't know. Yeah, when I've been in design conversations, I'm like, I have impulses. I like, wrote some crazy thing in the script about like the set falls apart, and like designers will be like, this set's not falling apart. Like, and I was like, oh, just like do whatever I don't know. And then like sort of the solutions that they come up with are like so much better dramaturgically and like so much better for the storytelling than anything I could have imagined, which is wild because like I wrote it.
Right.
But yeah, I wonder how yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking about like the musical theater book writer director relationship, and it probably is not unlike the playwright director relationship, but it does feel like I have noticed that my musicals tend to have more in-depth stage directions, for whatever that's worth.
This
and
was
like,
my next question.
Oh, great. Lay it on me.
No, I was gonna ask, how do you handle stage directions as a book writer? Because I think you handle it the opposite way that I do. But
yeah, I mean, I think that like, I mean, in my plays, my stage directions are very light. Like my plays are very conversational and conversation driven, and I really try to only include things that are absolutely necessary, unless it's like a sort of like bigger description of like a moment that I haven't figured out yet, but like that I trust the designer and directors to figure out. In musicals, I think that like so much more has to happen on each page of the show. Like there's so much more plot and action that needs to happen because like there are songs taking up a lot of like real estate in the thing, which is good, and the songs drive the story forward, hopefully, or they reveal character, hopefully, or they're just fun, hopefully. But like the actual plot needs to like, and the setup for everything needs to happen just really, really fast.
Yeah.
And one way to do that, I think, is by using like the visual element of theater and like movement and stage direction. And so I tend to go a little heavier with stage direction in musicals. I, without trying to be prescriptive, I think I also like, try to create a really specific idea of what each moment like needs to do to carry the story. Acknowledging that like I love impossible stage directions. I write them in my plays all the time. Like again, like the set falls apart thing is like a thing that a trick I've used more than once. But in Axmis, there's a stage direction where like a car drives across the stage with a tree hitched to the top, and like there is not going to be a real car. There will be a creative solution, but like what I did know is that there needed to be a moment there that like transitioned us. And I think that like in a play, I might have just said like for that there's a sequence in an Axmis story where a bunch of trees are massacred all at once. And in the script, it's like a 5-page sequence. And I think in a play, I would have just said like, I would have written like a 1-page stage direction that was just like, it's crazy, it's violent, we can't really tell what's going on, everything's everywhere. But because this was like set to music and like each action had to be underscored specifically, it became imperative to the writing that like I get a little more specific about what those actions were, and like not just leaving it up to a director how to stage it, but not necessarily leaving like the number of beats or the order of beats up to a chance or to direction or production. Yeah. I also think that because again, text has to be so tight in a musical, that like additional direction about character can be helpful in a way that I don't think it usually is with plays. With my plays, I'm like, an actor will figure it out. I'm gonna just write the words that they say, and like I try not to like prescribe how a line is to be spoken too much. And I try not to do that in my musicals either, but I do think that like a little description about like this character is bubbly can go a long way in a musical, just because you might not have the text, like the volume of text to establish that in a way that you would in a play.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think that's true. I think that ye old adage of in a play you have 20 minutes for your setup, in a musical you have 10.
Yeah.
And that entire 10 minutes is probably your opening number anyway. Like I think that much is true as far as giving a little more about who a character is up front.
I'm so curious though, because you said you had sort of an opposite approach. I'm like curious about your approach to stage directions too.
Yeah, okay. I mean, when things are set to music, I don't think there's any way around it. If something has to happen on a specific beat, that's got to be it in the stage direction. Like you gotta have it right there. But I think generally speaking, I write my musical stage directions more like you write your play stage directions.
Oh, cool.
Because for me, my job is just to tell the story. And if there's a specific moment of action that has to happen or a specific visual that has to happen, I will write that out. But generally, I don't even give scene numbers. I just now I will put in the parenthetical where we are. Then we're going. Like I'm not gonna give you descriptions. I'm not gonna give you anything. I'm just gonna give you the scene.
Oh, cool. I see, that's like how I want to live my life. And I recognize that when I overwrite stage directions, it usually does come from a place of like fear or insecurity about like, have I put the story into the text that is actually going to be spoken and sung? And like when I feel like I haven't done that is when I like go overboard on stage directions. And like maybe the lesson is just like it's really hard to like tell a story in a musical. Like this is a really challenging form to work in, more so than like any other dramatic form, I think.
Yeah, especially if physical stage action is highly tied to, it could be the plot on a whole, or it could just be a song, or it could just be a scene. Like if the physical action is really important to the story you're telling at that moment, you do have to lean in and you do have to say what's happening. And absolutely you can put your ideal vision for what that looks like in there too. Because I think that's useful context when people are interpreting work. Not that they have to follow it to a T or yeah, I don't know. Book writing's hard.
Oh, so hard. I have I like the rewriting process on. I feel like musicals more than any other. Like I'm like, oh yeah, sometimes like it comes out perfect on the first try, and sometimes like things don't work out on the first try. I think that like in the musicals I've written, like nothing has ever worked out on the first try. Like it's always like many, like just the rewriting process is even more intense than it is for plays, I think, because it's so hard to actually nail it. Because it requires such specificity.
Yeah.
And I think also, I'm sure we'll get to this, but like my process with at least with my most recent with an Xmas story was to write a to like overwrite scenes, to basically write a version of the scene that sucks, but that just has a lot of material for the lyricist and composer to pull from. And then I'm like starting from, and then they've written a song, and then I sort of have to like work backwards and write the scene around it. Even though I already wrote the scene. And like because of that, it feels like I'm always like, it takes a long time to like get back to the original like story or impulse or whatever.
That's fascinating. Okay, no, let's chat about this, because again, I don't do that. That's not how I write my stuff. I'm very like, before I even sit down to write a scene, I have to decide for myself what the main thing is that would need the song. Like, why are we doing this scene, and what is the moment in here that requires singing? Because otherwise it's just a scene, right? And then if I'm writing with someone else, like if I'm not writing songs, then I need to have that conversation with them, so we're all on the same page before I even write my scene. Or if it's just me, like I'll go ahead and like set myself up for the song and pull myself out of it too, or however that needs to happen. But I'm so curious. Say more about this writing, especially the writing of the bad version.
Yeah, I think I mean, I will say when like working on an Xmas story with Patrick and Anthony, we would have a conversation about the scene beforehand and talk about like, all right, like, you know, what might a song moment be in this, and like sort of like what generally needs to happen. And then that is sort of what I would, so I was working from something. It wasn't just total like, you know, random like word vomit, but it was, you know, I think like we went in not knowing like what the hook was, or necessarily even like which characters would be singing, or like what, you know, what the sort of arc of the song was. Like that was all sort of stuff that I think was generally found after I had written a version of the scene that like provided some kind of shape. And I think that like I have also written, I think, the other way, which is to say like when I was writing Exposed Bone, for which I wrote both book and lyrics, and we also wrote lyric first, and so like I was able to just sort of write exactly as I wanted, and then Carl just set things to music because he's brilliant and can do that. But I feel like that was a case where like I did know more. I'm like, oh, here's the shape, here's where the song goes, like here's what a hook might be, and then I can just write. But I think that for me, with an Xmas story, I was trying to actively, and my collaborators were sort of asking for me to provide a like dump of material to potentially like pull things from. And there are like in the original like word vomit draft, there are like the hooks for a lot of those songs like are just in the text somewhere. It was just like a random line that like Patrick pulled out and was like, this seems like a hook. Which is a lot of fun for me. I mean, that's like enormously fun. But yeah, trying to think of like what it would be like to write. Well, I guess I have done that too. I'm like, I've also written scenes around songs that already exist. When I wrote Two Star Motel with Patrick, he wrote all of the songs while we talked about the story, and then I didn't write the book at all until all the songs were written, like the entire score. Granted, the songs in that show work a little differently than in a more traditional musical. Like they don't really drive the plot in quite the same way. But like we didn't have the book. We like just had the songs, and then like form of the book around it. And like that, obviously, I was not trying to like overwrite. I was just trying to like write the scene that needed to happen. But yeah, I don't know. I guess so. Maybe what I'm saying is all 3 times I've done this have been, and I don't know what I did. I have no idea what I did for my first musical. So like the 4 times that I've done this, I every approach has been different. And yeah, I think that like just the most recent approach that I've taken is this sort of like overwrite, overstuff, let them pull, and then, you know, wind it back. But yeah, like an Axmas story didn't have jokes in it until like the 3rd draft, because like I just like rewrote the scene around the song, and then like, but I didn't like actually do anything to like make the scene pop or like crackle, because I was just trying to like get the shape together.
Interesting, yeah.
I don't know, yeah.
Huh. I don't know that my brain could work that way. I would have to try that out. I like the idea of it. And I mean, I think we all, in rewriting processes, when a song is working but a scene isn't, do that kind of work where we have to rewrite the scene and make sure that the song is still doing the song's thing, for sure. Yeah. And I love working from when a book writer will like write out a large scene that we know is going to get eaten, or monologue that's going to get eaten by the songs. But also, as a book writer, I find that really hard to do. I don't like doing that for myself, let alone for other people. Yeah. But
I will be honest, like that kind of like throwing out a lot of writing, which is what it is. You're sort of like taking a lot of writing and then just sort of like tossing it into the wind and like expecting that very little of it is going to come back to you. I would like, that is like the kind of writing that I would do like sort of haphazardly in the bathtub, just sort of like clicky clacky, like I don't care about this at all. I just need to get something out and like find a shape. Because if I got precious about it, then it would be like devastating.
Yes.
I also, your point earlier about like, I need to know what the singing moment or the song moment in each scene is before I write it makes so much sense. And I feel like it's such a good strategy in many ways, because there was a scene at the end of Axmas that did not have a song. And we like tried to like, you know, explore a song moment. And we like thought that the scene was necessary for the outline of like, for the arc of the plot. But like, there was just no song moment in it. And we like looked for one and it was like, this isn't working. There is no song moment. And the scene sat there for a while. And it was just this like horrible 2-page boring scene that like ground everything to a halt. And I was just, at one point, I think that like, I can't remember who suggested it. It might've been Anthony, but one of us was just like, can we just cut it? Like, do we need it? And the answer was, we did not need it, even remotely, like not in the slightest. And it's because like in a musical, like if the major moments are not, like, if the songs alone cannot give you at least the emotional arc of the story, probably like, it's not really a musical, or like it's not doing what musical theater can do at its best. Yeah.
And,
which
and I think that that idea of just cutting material, which, let's be real, y'all, it's hard to learn how to do. Like to learn that you can always write more, and the next thing you write will probably be better anyway. Like it's hard to cut the things you enjoy. But I think that something that, and I guess this is more of a lyricist thing. No, it's a book writing thing too. Something that's been really interesting for me watching my projects develop is, as the project gets closer to what it's been trying to do the whole time, certain scenes and songs will not fit anymore.
Yeah.
There was a song in the premiere that was in the world premiere of King's Legacy that the audience really loved, but I cut it after the premiere. I was like, this actually is not serving the story. And I had several people be like, but why? That one was so fun. I was like, yeah, but was it fun because of what I wrote, or because of what the director did with it? Because what the director did with it was great and entertaining, but it was great and entertaining because it wasn't serving the story. So there had to be another way to justify it. And then I was like, no, well, now, like, bye. Like, it doesn't have to be there.
Isn't that funny that like great collaborators can sometimes cover up like, you know, issues or like they sort of like manage to paper over. I think it's really valuable to hear your work read by like people who are not like professional actors, or, you know, just because like everything becomes very apparent in a way that like a really good actor can make really bad work sound amazing.
Yep.
And like, yeah, I love that like you sort of recognize that you're like, this moment was like not serving the story. My director figured out a way to make it work in the production, but like that still doesn't mean that it needs to be in the show.
Right.
That must be, I mean, that's a really hard thing to do though. That's really hard, especially when it's like a song that you like or that your audience likes, especially that you've gotten positive feedback on. Like, this is why the concert.
This is what, yeah, absolutely. But I will say though that there was a kernel in there that was serving the story, and that part I kept and became the basis for the new scene and song.
Oh, cool. Oh, that's amazing.
So like, not everything had to go.
Which also just like points back towards like the way that oftentimes like the initial instinct is right, even if like the way that you explored it the first time isn't serving you or the play. Like going back to your initial like impulse or the kernel of the thing is like usually a really valuable thing to do. Yeah.
I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit to can we have a combo about structure, because I love structure, you love structure. There are a lot of people out there who are super freaking resistant to structure, which I get, totally get it. But how do you approach musical theater where structure is concerned, especially knowing that there are so many options out there for how to structure a show?
Yeah. I mean, I think again, every time I've done this now, I've taken a different approach. I think An Axmas Story has been definitely the most typically structured show I've probably ever written. And that it is, they talk about like the 3-act model in BMI, the first 2 acts being before the intermission, the 3rd act being after. The first act is like you meet everyone, you set up, who these characters are, and then at the end there's like, the crisis moment or the inciting incident. The 2nd act is sort of like, those things playing out, and then you build to a climax or a point of crisis at the end, which is your intermission. You come back with like a charm song to like ease the audience back into the show. And then, the plot plays out from there. There's like a sort of like split about halfway through where you might include a comedy song, like they're about halfway through the 3rd act, I mean. There are like I want songs that go at the beginning, and they're sort of like, your opening number is probably like a big scene song. You probably have 1 or 2 more of those, like whenever there's a lot of plot that has to happen, and you're not really sure how to cover it all. This feels like
just like condensed a full day of BMI into a minute.
Thank you. I mean like and I find that very helpful and useful. I think that like when you're writing a protagonist who like knows what they want and like pursues it, and like when you're writing sort of a musical that when you're writing a story that like can fit that model, I think that model works amazingly well. I think there's a reason that it's like done all the time. My other shows have definitely all taken on more non-traditional structures. The first musical I wrote alternated between like a full scene, like no music, like like an 8 to 10 minute scene, and then like a 3-minute song, and then another like 8-minute scene and a 3-minute song, and just sort of like flashed between those, and all of the songs took place in the far future and the scenes were all taking place in the present. So there was sort of like a structural conceit, but like it wasn't it was just a way of organizing, I think, the play more than like following a true like classic arc structure. I think like 2-Star Motel also has a really weird sort of like time loopy structure where like we sort of repeat the same events from 3 different people's perspectives, are the 3 acts of the play. And then with Exposed Bone, it's Exposed Bone was like structured as a reading series. So each scene is like a different reading in the series. And many of those were musicals. And then also there were some musical numbers that took place sort of non-diegetically that were like not part of the readings, that we found sort of later along in the process. And that show, I guess, has more of the arc, a typical arc for a play, and that like there's protagonists, there's an antagonist, the protagonist and antagonist fight, and then eventually the protagonist wins, sort of. Like that feels like sort of just a very like typical like structure for a work. And I am often resistant to that, because I feel like when I know what the structure is, then I can tell where the story is going, and I never want my audience to know where my stories are going. But sometimes it's okay if the audience feels a sense of comfort, I think, from the structure. For a lot of stories, that can be really beneficial, I think.
Yeah. Well, also there's, again, ye old adage of um, the audience gets more pleasure in a musical by knowing what's going to happen before the characters do. And I don't know that that's necessarily true in plays. I have found that if I don't know where a play is going, I tend to be more engaged. But with a musical, I like to watch things play out. So I have found for myself it tends to be true. But
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And now that I'm thinking about it, like, I think the only musical I can think of that really relies on like a plot twist is Next to Normal. And I'm sure there are others. I'm sure there are a lot of others that I'm just not thinking of, but like that show like has a plot twist in it that like feels like ideally would not be spoiled and like feels like the show is served by this like surprise moment. Um Comparing that to something like Fun Home, which tells you up front exactly what's going to happen. The entire plot is in the opening number. Like you could leave after that opening number and know everything that happens in that show. And you're right. The pleasure of it is seeing how it plays out.
Yeah.
And it's not any less emotionally engaging or just like sort of engaging in any way for that. Like it's actually more engaging because of that.
Right. Right. I think what makes surprise really, really difficult in a musical is making sure, and I feel like we get this tug of war in TV as well, where you don't want that surprise to cheapen everything that came before.
Yes, yeah.
Because the moment that the audience feels like they've been duped and the past 2 hours has meant nothing is the moment where you have completely lost everyone.
Yeah, yeah. It's all just a dream thing, and it's like, then why were we here? Like,
right. And I think that's why like certain TV shows will rely on that. Here, I'm going to tell you exactly what happens, or I'm going to show you the last scene of the episode, and then we're going to move backwards, and you're going to see how we got there, so that it's not a surprise, but the surprise is how you got there. And then, but it doesn't feel cheap because you already have a setup and you knew it was coming anyway, you know. And I think that one of the reasons that Next to Normals doesn't feel cheap is because that surprise moment, we are experiencing what the character is experiencing.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You are being pulled along that journey in the same way that they are.
Yeah.
And then that shock moment happens. I won't spoil it for anyone who does not know the show, but that surprise moment happens. You're like, oh, at the same time that they're like, oh.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a really good point. It's not a surprise for just the audience. It's a surprise for the sort of like perspective character as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I really like that. That's really insightful. And I think there's also something to be said about the fact that turn happens about halfway through the first act of the show. Like it happens early. That's probably, again, in like the 3-act sort of like version, it's probably the end of Act 1, but it's like midway through. It's like 30-40 minutes into the show.
Yeah.
Like it feels like if that had sort of been a twist at the end of the show, it probably would have felt cheap to me regardless of how it was done.
That's fair. Yeah.
Which is funny because I was like formative things. I was like a really big M. Night Shyamalan fan when I was a kid. I like loved The Sixth Sense. I loved Unbreakable. I loved those like stupid twists at the end. The Village, I was like a sucker for it. And I think maybe also that's like a matter of form, like that maybe works better in film and specifically in like the kind of genre film that he does. But also like, you know, his new movies aren't good. Like I think, sorry. But like, I think that like, there's a way in which like, oh, that is a trick. And like, it's a trick that only really works sometimes. And like that diminishes in like power over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But this has me thinking about other like quote unquote twists that happen in musicals, because I think there are some others that I don't think harm the show. Like, and now I'm thinking about Wicked. I'm gonna talk about Wicked because it's 20 years old at this point, y'all. But like when Elphaba's not dead, that is technically a surprise moment.
Yeah. Ooh.
but it doesn't feel cheap in that moment. And I think maybe part of that is because you're coming into a story that's not the Wizard of Oz, so you're open to the possibility that things will change and have changed. Like there are things that are different in this story. But then also, I think you kind of get set up for it by the fact that like we figure out who the Tin Man is, and we figure out who the Scarecrow is, and then that twist happens. It's like, okay, at least we were set up for twists to occur.
Yeah. And like twists that like rely on an understanding of the original story and that like are riffing on a story that we're familiar with. And so there's still that sense of familiarity. There's a sense of like comfort in that, even as like we're turning it on its head over and over in the second act of that show,
right?
With the reveals of who the characters turned out to be.
Yeah. I will also say though that story very comfortably follows a hero's arc and we're comfortable with that story. Like we expect her to die, and if it is a true hero's journey, she will be revived in some way, right? So like there is that aspect as well.
That's a really good point as well. I think that that show is like Alphaba's I Want song is like I feel like my go-to, like this is how you write an I Want song. Like it's the third song of the show and it goes right there and it does that thing.
It does it very well.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm such a fan of structure as a writer because I need it. Like I don't understand people who can go into something that is formless. But also, I don't think I've ever seen a piece of musical theater that truly is formless. There is a form to everything. Whether or not it's a classical form, I don't care. Like one of my favorite shows in the world is Company. And that does not follow the classic form.
Not even slightly. Yeah. But it has a very clear structure.
Right. And even if you're not thinking about the structure, if you're not analyzing that structure, you can feel that emotional journey the whole time. Like
and maybe that's where like I feel like sometimes I'm resistant to like the hero's journey, but like I do think that like you always want to follow a character on an arc, like a character who takes a journey, like regardless of what kind of journey that is, whether it's like physical or mental or like emotional or whatever. Like you want to follow a journey, or maybe even I've seen plays like Lucas Nath, I feel like is a playwright who a lot of his plays like follow an intellectual journey or an argument journey. Like they're sort of essays as plays that like I'm not following the characters in those plays. I'm not like emotionally invested in the characters in like the Christians or whatever, or in Red Speedo, but like what I am invested in is like the argument that keeps shifting and changing, and that's what arcs in those plays, and that I feel like is still structure. But usually it's a character, because characters are fun and we love characters and we want to relate to people who seem like us. Yeah.
That identification.
Yeah.
All right. Unless there's anything else you want to drop as a nugget about book writing.
The last thing I'll say, I just feel like I should say about structure is like, I feel like it is really, I am never able to finish writing something until I know what the shape of the thing is. And like the shape can always be different. Like you get to make the shape, but there always needs to be a shape. I think this is like what you're saying is like musical theater always has a form. There's always a structure, because like if it's formless entirely, it's probably not going to like coalesce into a stageable musical. So yeah, I don't know. I'm obsessed with structure. I think about it all the time, and I have no words to talk about it.
Me too. You know what? I've been thinking about this for a long time. I guess it's the first time I'm saying this publicly, so here we go. But in the Musical Theater Writing Collective, the next course I would like to offer is a structured course, because I think there's so much to explore that already exists in the canon that people don't necessarily think about. But there are so many ways to write a musical and do it successfully, and there's a track record of that. And like doing a deep dive, that gets me going.
That sounds really fun. Yeah, look at like Company in a chorus line versus like the more traditionally structured stuff versus like I think Spelling Bee also is like has in some ways a classical structure, but also like is so structured around this specific activity or this specific event. That's also, I'm a sucker for that too. Just like anytime. One of my professors' plays in undergrad that I dramaturged was structured as like it was each scene was like a step of the 12-step program, and it was very light touch. Like she didn't really like dwell on this or emphasize it, but I sort of was like, this is the key to the play. Like it is, the whole thing is like, it's a 12-step program, that's the play. Anyway, yeah. Structure, book writing. Thank you for talking to me about it.
Heck yeah. All right, I got some wrap-up questions. You ready?
Yes.
These should be definitely shorter terms.
Okay.
All right, what's your favorite non-musical theater writing activity?
Oh God. This is such a bad answer. I love video games. I think they're just great.
That's not a bad answer. That's not a bad answer at all. Are you a systems person or a computer person?
I play a lot of walking simulators, so I played those mostly on my computer for a while. But then they've started being released on Switch. I'm also a Nintendo person, so I've only ever had Nintendo systems. And yeah, I just play a lot of like story narrative games on my Switch. And also, you know, like a lot of other stuff too. But like, the way that video games can tell a story, chef's kiss, because it makes you feel like you're telling the story, but it's also still crafted. Yeah.
Unless you are fully telling the story, like when we play Smash Brothers and you destroy my life. Like it's the same story every time you destroy my life, but it happens differently each time.
That's true. I do enjoy a good Smash Brothers. Right. We craft the story as we live it. So,
is there a story that you either know in the back of your head or you know somewhere in here that you know at some point you want to write?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's always like 5 of them in the back of my mind. The one that I'm most excited to start writing that I haven't started writing yet is I want to write like an I Love Lucy style like romantic comedy about a couple, a trans woman and a trans man who invite a like cis straight guy to be a third in their relationship. And it is about like the sort of like dynamics of this like triangle of people, but like again, it's a romantic comedy. I think like it's about like this couple that like ultimately stays together and like loves each other throughout the entire thing. I want to write something happy is what I'm saying. And I'm specifically also I've been developing this idea with my friend Bruce Jones, who they would play the trans feminine role, and I've just been working on it with them for a long time, but I haven't actually started doing the clicky clacky yet, but like it is very much like in my heart and mind, and feels like it's been in the back of my mind for a while and is slowly inching its way forward.
Yes,
so.
I love that. Oh, I can't wait to read that.
Thank you.
Sounds fantastic. All right, one more. You ready?
Yes.
What is something that you love or are very proud of? Could be either direction here, that you don't get to talk about often.
Something that I'm proud of that I don't get to talk about often.
Or love. It could just be something.
Or that I love. Oh, this is the worst answer. I looked over at like all of the things that are just off screen because everyone has a mess just off screen in Zoom world. And I'm like, there's just like a bunch of empty cans of Twisted Tea. I became very into Twisted Tea this year. I think it's great. I love that it's not carbonated. A better answer would be that I've gotten really into bowling lately. I don't know. I've been just like going bowling with friends, and like that's been really fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Twisted Tea and bowling. Why not?
It's so Midwestern.
We are not sponsored by Twisted Tea, but if
they want, yeah, no, Twisted Tea, come on,
please. Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, those sweet, lovely, like recreational activities we do with people. That sounds great. Charlie, where can people interact with you or follow you or find your material? I know we talked about NPX, but tell me all the things that I can drop in the description below.
Yes. So I am on New Play Exchange, Charlie O'Leary. My website is www.charliehOleary.com. And you can, I don't know, read about me there. I am on Twitter and Instagram as The Bath Years, which is The Bath, BATH, as in like taking a bath. because that's where I write. And I'm on TikTok, I think, as well as the math
Nice.
years.
Okay.
We do love TikTok. All of these are a little kooky, and I maybe should try to like separate my personal and professional lives slightly more on social media, but I refuse. So if you want to really see how loopy I am, please follow me on Twitter.
Great. Yeah, there's definitely some stuff out there, but you check it out before you give a follow.
Yeah.
Do a little vetting. No, it's good. Charlie's a delight to follow on social media.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for this conversation today.
Thank
I so
you.
appreciate you and your brain. And
This was so much fun. I so appreciate you asking me to do this, and just like being down to have a conversation about theater and musicals and writing and like all the stuff that I think about all the time anyway. So this was great.
of course, and there were other things that we discussed as a potential topic that I'll just have to have you back.
I love it.
Heck yeah. And thank you for all to all of you for watching today. And if you
Yes.
enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, give it a little like, that sort of thing. And tell everyone you know that it's great.
I will be.
Thank
Smash
you.
that like button, as the kids say.
Smash the like button. Oh boy. Anyway, so thank you. And I'll see you again soon. All right.
Thank you all for being here with me today, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers!